September 1589. The hills above Dieppe, Normandy. Henry of Navarre stood on the ramparts of Arques castle and watched an impossible situation unfold. 35,000 troops of the Catholic League were deploying across the river valley below: infantry, cavalry, Spanish mercenaries, artillery. The largest army France had assembled in years, and they were here to kill him. Henry commanded 8,000 men, mostly French Protestants, some Swiss mercenaries, fortifications that weren't finished, supply lines that barely existed, and absolutely no hope of reinforcement, because the only nation that might help him, England, was hundreds of miles across the Channel and probably didn't even know he needed saving yet. The Duke of Mayenne, commanding the Catholic League forces, had made his intentions brutally clear. Henry of Navarre would either die here at Arques or flee France entirely. There would be no negotiation, no compromise. Because Henry wasn't just another Protestant general. He was the rightful king of France, and Catholic France would rather destroy itself than accept a Protestant on the throne. This is the story of Arques, the battle where English troops crossed the Channel to save a French king fighting for his throne. The campaign where religious war nearly tore France apart, and the moment when 4,000 English soldiers changed the course of French history by doing what seemed absolutely mad, sailing into an impossible fight to defend a cause that wasn't even theirs. Welcome to Britain's history. Today we're covering the battle that demonstrated what English soldiers could achieve when fighting for principles rather than territory. The engagement where professional troops and desperate courage defeated overwhelming odds, because sometimes the right cause matters more than tactical sense. But before we get to that moment when English ships appeared on the horizon, before we watch 4,000 redcoats change the course of French succession, we need to understand how France descended into civil war and why England had any interest in saving a Protestant claimant to the French throne. And if you're interested in the campaigns where English forces fought for more than just conquest, subscribe. We cover the battles that matter, the engagements where English soldiers demonstrated that professional skill and moral conviction could overcome seemingly impossible odds. France in 1589 was tearing itself apart. The French wars of religion had raged for 30 years. Catholic against Protestant, League against Huguenot, dynasty against dynasty. Tens of thousands had died. Cities were sacked. The countryside was devastated. And the fundamental question remained unanswered. Could France tolerate religious diversity, or must it be exclusively Catholic? Henry III, the last Valois king, had tried navigating between Catholic and Protestant factions. He'd failed spectacularly. In 1588, he'd ordered the assassination of Henry, Duke of Guise, leader of the Catholic League, thinking this would break League power. Instead, it turned virtually all Catholic France against him. In August 1589, a Catholic monk stabbed Henry III to death. As he died, the king acknowledged his heir, Henry of Navarre, the Protestant leader. Henry of Navarre became Henry IV of France by legitimate succession. His claim was unquestionable by French law, but Catholic France, which meant most of France, rejected him instantly. The Catholic League, now led by the Duke of Mayenne, brother of the murdered Guise, controlled Paris and most major cities. They had Spanish support, papal blessing, and the conviction that a Protestant king would destroy Catholic France. Henry IV faced an impossible situation. He commanded perhaps 20,000 troops, Protestant Huguenot, some moderate Catholics who valued legitimacy over religion, and mercenaries. Against him stood the League's much larger forces, Spanish intervention, and the hostility of most French cities. He needed allies, he needed recognition, and he needed time to convince Catholic France that a Protestant king could protect Catholic interests. England was the obvious ally. Queen Elizabeth I had spent decades supporting Protestant causes across Europe. She'd backed Dutch rebels against Spain. She'd survived Catholic assassination attempts. She'd defeated the Spanish Armada just a year earlier. And she understood that a Protestant France, or even a France divided by civil war, served English interests by weakening both France and Spain. But Elizabeth's support came with complications. England and France had been enemies for centuries. English help for Henry of Navarre meant English troops on French soil, something that made even Protestant Frenchmen nervous. And Elizabeth, always cautious with money, wouldn't commit large forces without being convinced Henry could actually win. Henry IV, showing the political skill that would define his reign, understood what Elizabeth needed. In June 1589, he sent urgent messages to England explaining his situation and requesting military support. He promised to protect Protestant interests in France. He pledged to maintain alliance with England, and he made clear that without English help, France would become either a Spanish puppet state or descend into permanent chaos. Elizabeth, convinced of Henry's legitimacy and concerned about Spanish influence in France, agreed to send military aid. In August 1589, she ordered Lord Willoughby to prepare an English expeditionary force. 4,000 soldiers would sail to Normandy to support Henry IV. The commander on the ground would be Sir Roger Williams, one of England's most experienced officers, a Welsh soldier who'd fought in the Netherlands against Spain, and a man who believed passionately in the Protestant cause. Williams was perfect for this mission. He was aggressive, skilled, and politically committed to helping Protestant rulers. He understood modern warfare. He'd served in multiple European campaigns, and he had absolutely no patience for commanders who hesitated when decisive action was needed. Henry IV, meeting Williams for the first time, immediately recognised a kindred spirit, another soldier who understood that sometimes you had to risk everything on audacious moves. But before English help could arrive, Henry IV had to survive September 1589, and that meant facing the Duke of Mayenne's attempt to crush him at Arques. Henry had retreated to Arques, a small town near Dieppe, for several good reasons. Dieppe was a port, which meant potential supply and reinforcement from England. Arques had a castle that could serve as defensive anchor. The terrain favoured defence, rivers and hills that would force attackers to assault uphill across difficult ground. And Henry was running out of options. Mayenne's much larger army was hunting him across Normandy. If Henry ran, he'd be caught in open country and destroyed. Better to stand at Arques with some defensive advantage. Mayenne arrived in mid-September with overwhelming force, 35,000 troops, twice what Henry had, even with generous counting. Fresh Spanish infantry, heavy artillery, cavalry that could exploit any breakthrough, and absolute confidence that numerical superiority would decide the battle. Mayenne's plan was straightforward: pin Henry's forces at Arques, bombard their positions, assault with overwhelming force, and either kill Henry or drive him into exile. Henry's position was desperate but not hopeless. He'd used the time before Mayenne's arrival to improve Arques' fortifications. Earthworks were raised, artillery positions were prepared, fields of fire were cleared, the castle itself was strengthened. Swiss mercenaries, professional soldiers who understood defensive warfare, manned key positions, and Henry demonstrated personal courage by fighting alongside his men, inspiring them through example. The battle began on September the 15th with League artillery bombardment. Catholic guns pounded Henry's positions, trying to destroy defensive works and demoralise defenders. Henry's artillery fired back, but he was outgunned. The question was whether his fortifications could withstand the punishment long enough for anything to change the situation. Mayenne launched his first infantry assault on September 21st. League forces attacked across difficult terrain toward Henry's defensive positions. The assault was conventional but powerful. Dense infantry formations supported by cavalry, attempting to overwhelm defenders through sheer mass. Henry's Swiss mercenaries demonstrated why they were Europe's most sought-after soldiers, delivering devastating defensive fire that tore through attacking formations, but the League kept coming. Wave after wave of infantry advanced despite casualties. Henry's defenders were being ground down. Every assault reduced his effective strength. Men fell wounded, ammunition depleted, defensive works were damaged, and there was no reserve, no relief, no hope of reinforcement because England was hundreds of miles away across the Channel. Henry faced a terrible calculation. His fortifications were holding, but wouldn't last forever. His troops were exhausted. Mayenne had reserves to throw into battle. Unless something changed dramatically, Arques would fall within days, and when it fell, the cause of religious tolerance in France would die with Henry of Navarre. On September 23rd, Henry stood on the ramparts watching another League assault develop. His officers urged retreat while escape was still possible. Save the army, live to fight another day. Except that Arques couldn't be held against such overwhelming force. But Henry refused. Running meant abandoning any claim to be King of France. It meant admitting that Protestant leadership was impossible. It meant surrender. Then someone shouted and pointed toward the sea. Ships, English ships, coming from Dieppe. Dozens of vessels carrying troops, supplies, and the promise that Henry wasn't fighting alone after all. So Roger Williams brought 4,000 English soldiers to Arques over 3 days in late September. They arrived in multiple waves, some landing at Dieppe, others coming upriver to Arques itself. Williams had pushed his forces hard, knowing every hour mattered. Elizabeth's orders were clear. Support Henry IV, but don't commit English troops to hopeless battles. Williams interpreted those orders creatively. Get to Arques before it falls, then it won't be hopeless. The English troops Williams commanded weren't raw recruits. These were professional soldiers who'd fought in the Netherlands against Spain, veterans who understood modern warfare and the realities of European religious conflicts. They brought English muskets, English discipline, and English tactical doctrine that emphasised defensive firepower and steady formations. These were the same kind of troops who'd faced the Spanish Armada a year earlier, professional, experienced, and confident in their abilities. Williams himself embodied English military professionalism. Welsh by birth, he'd spent years fighting across Europe for Protestant causes. He'd served under Leicester in the Netherlands. He'd fought alongside Dutch rebels. He'd written extensively about military theory and modern warfare, and he understood something crucial. Religious wars weren't won by cavalry charges and medieval tactics. They were won by disciplined infantry with modern weapons fighting from strong positions. The English arrival transformed the battle's dynamics instantly. Henry now commanded 12,000 troops instead of 8,000. More importantly, the troops' composition changed dramatically. Instead of mostly French Protestant militia and some Swiss mercenaries, Henry now had professional English infantry who'd proven themselves in combat against Europe's finest armies. Williams brought officers who understood defensive warfare, English sergeants who could drill troops under fire, and equipment, powder, shot, weapons that Henry desperately needed. English presence also sent powerful political signals. Mayenne had counted on Henry being isolated and friendless. Now English ships anchored at Dieppe, English supplies flowed into Arques, and English soldiers manned the defensive positions alongside French Protestants. This wasn't some minor skirmish. England was committing real military force to Henry's cause. And if England was willing to intervene, what would Spain do? What about other Protestant powers? The religious war was escalating beyond just French internal conflict. More importantly, the English arrival shook Mayenne's confidence. The Duke had counted on crushing Henry quickly before foreign intervention. Now he faced a larger, better supplied enemy with access to English naval support. His numerical advantage still existed, but was less overwhelming. And the political implications were clear. England was committed to Henry's cause, which meant this fight wasn't just about French succession anymore. Mayenne responded by launching a massive assault on September 24th, using fresh troops to try crushing the combined French-English force before they could fully integrate. League infantry attacked across multiple positions, trying to find weak points in the defensive line. Spanish mercenaries demonstrated why they were feared across Europe, advancing with professional discipline despite heavy casualties. But they met English and Swiss defenders who were equally professional and fighting from prepared positions. Williams deployed his English infantry with characteristic tactical skill, using concentrated musket volleys to shatter advancing formations, positioning troops to create crossfires, employing the defensive tactics that made English infantry feared throughout Europe. The Swiss mercenaries, reinforced by English support, held critical positions through sheer determination and superior shooting. The fighting was brutal at close range. League forces reached the defensive works and fighting devolved into hand-to-hand combat in places. English troops demonstrated why they were valued across Europe. When formations were necessary, they maintained them perfectly. When individual combat was required, English soldiers proved equally capable with sword and dagger. Williams moved constantly along the defensive line, positioning reinforcements, encouraging troops, and demonstrating the kind of leadership that made professional soldiers willing to fight impossible battles. Henry of Navarre fought alongside his men, demonstrating the personal courage that would characterize his reign. He wasn't one of those kings who commanded from safety. He was in the defences, encouraging troops, making tactical decisions, and visibly sharing the danger. His soldiers saw their king refusing to abandon them. English troops, accustomed to commanding officers who led from the front, recognised a leader worth following. The mutual respect between Henry and Williams, between French Protestant militia and English professional infantry, created an effective fighting force that proved greater than its individual components. The League assaults failed with heavy casualties. Spanish infantry, despite their professional reputation, couldn't break positions that combined French determination, Swiss skill, and English firepower. Mayenne's cavalry, attempting to exploit gaps in the defensive line, found no exploitable weaknesses, just concentrated musket fire that emptied saddles and shattered formations. By day's end, League forces withdrew, having accomplished nothing except adding to their casualty lists. By September 29th, after 2 weeks of fighting and thousands of casualties, Mayenne made the painful decision to withdraw. He couldn't break Henry's army. English reinforcement changed the strategic calculation, and continuing the siege would just waste more League troops without achieving victory. Mayenne's retreat left Henry victorious at Arques. The battle itself wasn't decisive in ending the religious wars. Those would continue for years. But Arques established several critical facts. Henry of Navarre could defeat the Catholic League in open battle. English support was real and effective. And the Protestant cause in France wouldn't be crushed by military force alone. English casualties at Arques were significant but manageable, perhaps 400 killed and wounded from Williams's 4,000 troops. League casualties were much heavier, probably 3,000 or more killed, wounded, or captured. But the real victory was strategic and political. Henry remained in the field. His claim to the French throne remained viable. And Catholic France now understood that military victory over Henry wouldn't be easy. For England, Arques demonstrated the value of limited military intervention, supporting legitimate rulers. Elizabeth hadn't committed massive resources, just 4,000 troops at the critical moment. But those troops, properly led and deployed at the right time, changed the campaign's outcome completely. It was exactly the kind of cost-effective foreign policy Elizabeth preferred. Maximum strategic impact for minimum expenditure. Sir Roger Williams became something of a hero in England for his role at Arques. He'd sailed to France knowing the odds were terrible, deployed his forces aggressively despite being outnumbered, and helped save a Protestant king through professional skill and personal courage. Elizabeth recognised his achievement. Henry IV certainly appreciated it. Williams remained in France for several more years fighting for Henry's cause. The relationship between Henry IV and England, established at Arques, would prove strategically important for decades. Henry never forgot that English troops saved him when his situation seemed hopeless. Even after he converted to Catholicism in 1593, famously declaring, "Paris is worth a mass," he maintained friendly relations with England. The alliance formed at Arques shaped diplomatic relations between the two kingdoms for a generation. For Henry IV, personally, Arques was a defining moment. He'd faced overwhelming odds, refused to surrender, and won through defensive skill, personal courage, and timely foreign support. Those same characteristics would define his reign. Pragmatic, courageous, willing to accept help, focused on unifying France rather than pursuing religious extremism. The Battle of Arques also revealed important lessons about defensive warfare and coalition operations. Williams and Henry demonstrated that professional troops in prepared positions could defeat larger forces through disciplined fire and tactical skill. The combination of French local knowledge, Swiss professional infantry, and English military expertise proved greater than the sum of its parts. English participation at Arques represented something unusual in the long Anglo-French relationship. For centuries, English troops in France meant conquest, invasion, and territorial ambition. At Arques, English soldiers fought to support French Protestant interests without demanding French territory in return. It was intervention based on religious and political principle, rather than naked territorial expansion, a different model of English involvement in continental affairs. The French Wars of Religion would continue until 1598, when Henry IV finally achieved widespread acceptance as king and issued the Edict of Nantes, guaranteeing Protestant rights. But Arques was the moment when Henry's cause survived its most desperate crisis. Without William's 4,000 English troops arriving at exactly the right moment, Henry might have been killed or driven into exile. French history, perhaps European history, would have developed very differently. For English military tradition, Arques exemplified professional competence and coalition warfare. William's troops weren't fighting for traditional English objectives. They were supporting a foreign claimant to a foreign throne. But they fought with the same discipline and skill they demonstrate defending English interests. It was exactly the kind of professional, military intervention that made English troops valued across Europe, reliable, competent, and effective regardless of the specific cause. The battle also demonstrated that sometimes smaller forces could achieve disproportionate impact through timing and morale effects. 4,000 English troops didn't dramatically change the numerical balance at Arques, but their arrival changed the psychological balance completely. Mayenne saw his window of opportunity closing. Henry saw hope replacing desperation, and the strategic calculations shifted from whether Henry would survive to how long the League could maintain its opposition. Arques represented English military involvement, driven by religious and ideological commitment, rather than just territorial ambition. Elizabeth and Williams believed in supporting Protestant rulers against Catholic attempts to crush Protestantism by force. They intervened not primarily for English advantage, but because they believed Henry of Navarre's cause was just. This ideological dimension to English foreign policy would recur throughout the following century. If this is the kind of military history that resonates with you, battles where English troops fought for principles as much as profit, campaigns where timely intervention changed everything, moments when English professionalism proved decisive in foreign conflicts, then you know what to do. These are the stories that demonstrate English soldiers at their finest. Thank you for watching Britain's history, the battles where English forces proved that courage, skill, and commitment to just causes could overcome impossible odds, told the way they deserve to be told.